Before we begin, I have a big announcement to make. Now that the Tomb Kings DLC has been released, for about a week now, I have recently partnered with GamesPlanet, the UK-based online gaming store, and they have allowed me to offer you guys a discount on the DLC. If you're looking to get the Tomb Kings at a cheaper price, please look in the description below and click on the link. This will also help out with growing the channel and allow me to produce videos more frequently. And I would love to produce more videos for you guys on a much more frequent basis, especially more frequent than I've been doing so far. Now, thank you for listening to that nice little announcement. Without further ado, sit back and enjoy the video. NAGASH'S, the land of the dead, whose name translates to Great Lands, and at one point these were. Now they are the land of the Tomb Kings. Hello ladies and gents, this is the Icy Breeze, and today we are going to look at one of the rulers of this land. This ruler has many names, such as the King of Kings, High King of NAGASH'S, Lord of the Earth, Monarch of the Sky, the Imperishable, Ruler of the Four Horizons, Mighty Lion of the Infinite Desert. Okay, there are a lot of titles. I mean, look at these. Somebody really had an ego to fill that day. We know him as Settra the Imperishable. He is the first king of NAGASH'S, and also the most recent. Let's begin. Settra was born in the year -2500. That's 2,500 years before the founding of the empire, and 2,495 years before the birth of Sigmar, the hero of mankind. At the time, NAGASH'S and Settra's city-state home of Khemri were both plagued by endless famine, drought, wars, and diseases on every front. These were no great lands as the name suggested. Upon ascending to his throne, Settra beseeched the old gods of NAGASH'S, but in a great ritual he sacrificed his own children to show his dedication. The NAGASH'S gods of the old world were apparently pleased with this sacrifice, and life was restored to NAGASH'S. And the great Mortis River, basically the Nile, flooded for the first time in decades. Khemri was finally purged of its sicknesses, and the people collected a harvest that they had never once seen before. The people of Khemri took this as evidence that he was the chosen of the gods, and Settra used this to his advantage. He became the first priest king of NAGASH'S. In time he conquered all of NAGASH'S, and united it for the first time under one ruler. I can do a separate video on the history and geography of NAGASH'S should you guys choose to, but right now we'll stick with Settra's story. Settra had a much bigger vision than simply conquering NAGASH'S. He saw an entire world under his rule. He built great navies and sent them all over the world. Keep in mind, this was during the time of the sundering between the High Elves and the Dark Elves, and it was roughly 600 years before the War of the Beards, also called the War of Vengeance, that destroyed relationships between the High Elves and the Dwarves forever, meaning that the High Elves were still in their prime, with the exception of losing Naggaroth, and the Dwarves were experiencing their golden age. At this time it was thought that man didn't matter. Settra proved them wrong, and just as these two kingdoms owned land all over the earth, Settra planned on doing the same. His navies brought back slaves and riches from all over the earth. But there was one problem that plagued his mind. Settra knew he would die eventually. Although he would never say it himself, Settra feared death, although Settra would say he fears nothing. There were many wise and powerful mages and priests in NAGASH'S studying the laws of magic, including the laws of death. So Settra tasked them with finding the key to eternal life. They never found it, although they did come close, and Settra himself was able to live for a long time due to their remedies. But still, death eventually embraced him. Fast forward several hundred years, and Nagash of the Third Dynasty enacts his necromantic rituals and unleashes the dead. During this point in NAGASH'S history, the nation faced its greatest amount of turmoil. Nagash had actually usurped power from his brother previously, and eventually authority fell so thin that many other usurpers tried claiming the throne for themselves. Kings waged wars against kings within their own nation, many of which were even undead. Faced with absolute anarchy in their midst, the Grand Hierophant of the Mortuary cult, and oldest and wisest, the most powerful of their kind, Katep, another legendary lord who will be released with the Tomb Kings, breached the tomb of Settra and restored their old king to life. If Settra could conquer NAGASH'S before, he could do it again. Being a king is responsible for the death of perhaps hundreds of thousands, the destruction of entire nations, the sacrifice of his own children, all for the sake of power, and who had even planned on performing this same act upon the entire world. I personally question as to whether this was a good idea of Katep. But regardless, Settra returned. Settra immediately planned on conquering NAGASH'S, but keep in mind, from the time of Settra's death to the present, 26 kings had already lived and died, encompassing 6 dynasties over the space of over 1,000 years. Settra would establish the 7th dynasty. A lot had happened since he had died, and he wanted to know. So he summoned his priests together to explain what had happened. And upon hearing the fate of Nagash and the failure of his cult to deliver on their promises of eternal life, so that he could bring Nehekhara to an eternal golden age, Settra cast his priests away and banished all of them, including Katep. His high priest Katep was banished entirely from Settra's presence on pain of his ultimate destruction. And Settra vowed to restore his empire to its former glory and create a paradise on earth that he so desired. He called this the Reign of 1,000,000 Years. After re-subjugating Nehekhara, he ordered many of his tomb kings to return to their chambers and await the call to life, knowing that such usurpers would only create unrest and disturb the peace. He also commanded that contact with the living be forbidden unless it was commanded by him, of course. So once again, the tomb kings stay within Nehekhara. The only time they would ever go to war would be for their own defense, or to reclaim relics stolen by treasure hunters. Settra had to prepare his kingdom and especially his city. He noticed that an unusual building had been constructed in his absence, the Black Pyramid. Nagash used this to summon forth his powers. And sure enough, 1,111 years roughly after his assassination by Al-Qadisar, Nagash returned, and this time he had Settra to deal with. After a great war, Settra would defeat Nagash, however, and drive him back to his fortress of NAGASH'S. Arkan the Black, Nagash's first lieutenant, stayed much longer to contend with Settra, but he too was beaten and subjugated once more, although the subjugation would not last forever, and Settra himself knew it. When his restoration project was complete, and he felt that both Khemri and Nehekhara were ready, Settra once again set his sights on the lands beyond his own, and thus declared that this would now be an age of expansion, and that the whole world would know his name. Here's where Settra's story gets a bit more interesting. Now, for those of you who are not clear on what it is, the end times are basically the end of the Warhammer world. The Total War games take place just before the end times, so think of all of this information that I've said so far as past information. Now we're going to go into what happened to Settra afterward. If you'd rather not have spoilers for the end times, now would be the good time to turn the video off. If you'd like to hear what Settra does during the end times, but you don't want to hear about his fate, I'll let you know when it'd be safe to turn that video off. But for now, let's listen. Just before Settra could begin his expansion, he discovered that once again his old nemesis, Nagash, had again returned. For those of you who know the end times lore, you know that Nagash was 10 times, if not 100 or 1,000 times more powerful than he ever was after this return. And the first thing Nagash did was invade Nehekhara. Instead of expanding, Settra then pulled his armies back to Nehekhara and used them for their defense. Nagash had split up his forces into several captains, each with their own tasks on conquering a part of the world. But first Nehekhara had to fall. Vampiric pirates from the New World sank Settra's fleet, forcing him to fight on land. But his army was amassed and readied. Undead monstrosities, war sphinxes, and other animated statues, alongside his legions of undead soldiers, all answered the call. But against them stood legions more of undead skeletons and zombies, terrorgeists and vargeists in the air, and every other horrifying creature that Sylvania had to offer. City by city, Nehekhara would eventually fall. Knowing that his master would be defeated one way or another, the high priest Katep broke his exile and approached Settra, with a plan for his master to defeat Nagash. Several decades after Settra's first death, one of his descendants, Nagash, the last of the first dynasty and great-great-great-great-great-grandson to Settra, ordered a weapon to be constructed that would be called the Destroyer of Eternities. It was a large, heavy, ornate blade which could easily cut through flesh and armor alike. It was used primarily for executing rebellious kings. Rumors suggested that those slain by this weapon have no chance of reaching the afterlife, and some have even said that it could kill the gods themselves, even chaos gods. Settra, intrigued by the potential to kill his adversary, listened intently, then finding the location of the blade, he killed Katep for breaking his exile. Settra does not go back on his word. But the blade was stolen, and not where Settra expected to find it. Settra would have arranged to search for the blade, but by then the armies of Nagash were approaching the city, and Khemri was besieged. Nagash was clearly heading for his Black Pyramid. If Settra could at least prevent Nagash from reaching the pyramid, he could potentially stem the flow of his power and be able to kill the necromancer before he reaches it. Instead, however, Settra found numerous tomb kings who had betrayed him. With the invasion of the undead, Nagash had also filled the ears of every tomb king and every undead citizen throughout all the land of the dead of his coming. In a manner very similar to the Chaos Gods, he whispered his incantations to them, and brought many tomb kings and other undead under his command. Upon seeing that Settra was not only being besieged by the great necromancer, but also his own treacherous tomb kings, the great High King of Nehekhara flew into a frenzy and dove for the field. Arkan the Black was one of the first to fight him. Alongside Settra was Herald Nakav. Settra's greatest champion, the Herald of the Imperishable, and perhaps his only true friend that he knew both in life and in undeath. At the Battle of Khemri, the Herald cleared the way for his master to meet Arkhan in battle. Arkhan evaded Settra's blows 3 times before engaging the king in battle. The two battled for an unknown amount of time before Settra finally emerged victorious, but his victory was bittersweet. Nagash knew of Settra's bloodthirstiness, his ambition, his impetuousness, and above all, he knew of his temper and how to use it against it. Arkhan was merely the distraction, but he was equally cunning nonetheless. To keep Settra's attention locked on him, Arkhan slew Settra's herald. King of Nehekara flew into an unseen rage before and tore Arkhan to pieces. Now, his opponent lay dead, his friend gone, and Khemri was about to fall. Magic began to emanate from the Black Pyramid. Nagash had reached his target. Nagash emerged from the Black Pyramid, now the new god of the dead, far more powerful than Settra could ever dream of becoming. Nagash was probably even more powerful than the Chaos Gods themselves. Still though, Nagash was impressed with Settra's ability to lead and to fight, and offered him a place in his kingdom and a chance to fight against Chaos. Settra's response has echoed throughout time. Settra does not serve. Settra rules. To this, Nagash beheaded Settra. Settra was not dead though. Settra now had to watch helplessly as his entire kingdom turned against him, and his city was destroyed. Nagash and his newly swelled hordes of kings and undead then marched north back to the old world. There Settra sat. It's not known how much time had passed, but Settra soon regained his complete consciousness and realized what was happening. Yet as just a head with a destroyed body completely eviscerated by Nagash's power, he had no way of acting. Until suddenly, a whisper spurred his conscience. Settra could suddenly hear the whispers of the Chaos Gods. Truly, the Chaos Gods knew that they needed help against Nagash, and in exchange for his service, they offered Settra an opportunity for revenge. The great King of Kings who had been brought so low, Settra accepted. Settra was then restored by the Chaos Gods, swelling with power from the Chaos Gods themselves, as well as power restored from his own ruined temples. Without hesitation, Settra flung towards Middenheim to meet Nagash again. Although marching with the Chaos Hordes, he had to prove himself first in battle. And so to prove himself, Settra had to first defeat an impossibly powerful opponent, Kholek the Sun Eater. Little did Kholek or any of the Northmen know, this was only the second Shaggoth that Settra has ever faced. In truth, hundreds of years before, Nehekara had been invaded by Northmen before. Amidst their ranks of barbarians also came trolls, giants, and even dragon ogres, one of which was a lightning-empowered Shaggoth that Settra beheaded. At this point I would read from the actual book itself, but unfortunately I can't seem to find it in the End Times novel. But to summarize, it said that Kholek and Settra's battle was so fierce that it flattened most of the Drakewald. The Drakewald is a forest outside of Middenheim. It's home to some of the thickest trees, landscapes, and other monstrosities one might never want to come in contact with. Remarkably though, none of this mattered. The two continued their fight until finally, Settra beheaded his second Shaggoth, and Kholek, the Herald of the Tempest, fell dead at the King of Kings' hand. Settra proceeded on to Middenheim to face Nagash, without the Destroyer of Eternities. If you'd rather not hear Settra's fate, whether he lives or dies, now would be the good time to turn the video off. But regardless, let's continue.
And thus do the unworthy fall.
A voice as dry as the desert sands rasped. A familiar form, ancient bones shrouded in tattered ceremonial wrappings, broken armor stepped towards them, Khopesh in hand.
Will you join him in oblivion, usurper?
Settra, Nagash said.
I have walked across half the world to find you, usurper. You broke me and scattered me, but Settra is deathless. Settra is eternal, and so Settra returned. And now he stands here, sword in hand, and he denies you, usurper. He stands between you and your triumph.
Settra croaked. He lifted his Khopesh and pointed it at Nagash, who regarded him as if he were less a threat than a curiosity. I did not bring you back, little king, Nagash said.
No,
Settra said.
You did not.
The Khopesh dipped.
They did. The jackals of the smokeless fire, the howlers in the waste. They dared to offer Settra aid. They offer Settra victories and empires and life unending.
And what did they ask in return, little king?
that I serve them and kill you.
Before Arkan could even react, Settra lifted his khopesh and lunged for the Lich King's master. But it wasn't Nagash he struck at. Instead, the blade of his khopesh was embedded into the chest of a dragon ogre who was just about to strike Nagash. But Settra was not on the side of Nagash. He wanted the kill for himself. He extended his khopesh towards Nagash.
Settra does not serve. Settra rules.
He strode past them, towards the horde of monsters.
Go, Prince of Gimri. Settra will forgive your trespasses if you make the jackals howl. Teach them that the kings of the great land cannot be bought and sold like slaves. And then, when it is done, Settra shall take your head and take back his people.
And with those final words to Nagash, Settra plunged into the Chaos Hordes. His fate is not entirely known according to the End Times lore, but he was last seen battling numerous Chaos Hordes and slicing demons and dragon ogres apart, until the world itself died. And at that, we conclude the lore video for Settra. Thank you everybody for joining me today. I hope you all enjoyed this new editing scheme I've made for lore videos. I will be doing lore videos for each of the Tomb King's legendary lords, and ending with Nagash. I will be doing more lore videos for some of the other legendary lords within Warhammer, as well as some more historical videos later on. On top of all this, I plan on doing some more interesting topics for Warhammer lore as well. For example, how to defeat chaos. And I don't mean in-game, I mean in the actual lore. There is actually a way I've found. So be on the lookout for those videos, as well as a Let's Play for Immortal Empire's campaign of Sigvald the Magnificent, and other videos in the future. Again, thank you everybody for joining me today, and remember, this is the Icy Breeze, and I bid you adieu.